Hey everyone out there, my name is Carlos. I work in Caillou support. There's a good chance you've talked to me if you've ever called the support helpline before. And we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar today. This is our preview of the upcoming release of Caillou's 4.2.4 version 8.5. And I just want to go over a couple of things real quickly about the webinar. And sorry, this was advanced. Sorry, everybody, this was advancing earlier and isn't at the moment. Well, I can go over it verbally. Hopefully everyone out there can hear me, but if you are having any audio trouble, I'm about to send a link via chat that goes to the third-party provider that does the software that we use for our webinar to troubleshoot audio issues. There's also a link here on the screen for just general troubleshooting if you're having any issues with the viewing of the webinar. You'll also notice that one of the features of this webinar is that there's a Q&A option. If you check out the bottom of your screen, you should see that there. And I'm going to ask that if you do have any questions, do feel free to type them in there, but we are going to wait until the end of the webinar to address those based on how much time we have at that point. And if there are any other lingering questions, then I'll just follow up with you guys later through support, or of course, do feel free to get in contact with support by calling us at the number on the screen or emailing us at that email, or of course, you can always visit the help center at support.caillous.com if you think of any other questions that you might have afterwards. Also, after the webinar, our support manager Theron's going to be sending out an official release announcement for 8.5, and that will contain not only a link to the release notes for this, but also a link to a recording of this webinar. So if there's anyone out there you know of who isn't able to attend right now, or if you have to leave early, you can always, of course, view them later. So your host today is going to be Bess, the 4.2.4 product manager, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to her now.
Great, thank you, Carlos. So as we get into the agenda, we're actually going to stop the video, but wanted to have it on briefly just to say hello to everyone. But we're going to stop the video for now just so you're able to fully see the slides to see the information we have. So the 8.5 release that is coming out on Saturday includes some federal form updates as well as validation updates, and some updates and fixes in different parts of the application, and a continuation of our attachment reboot or our attachment improvements. And so what I'm going to do today is go through some of these things on slides, especially because some of these things can't actually be demoed very well, but I think that you'll appreciate this information. And then, of course, we'll jump into that live demo to show you some of these things in action. Again, encourage people to ask questions along the way. We really want to make sure that the work that we've been doing has maximum impact to make your lives better. And so if you have any questions as we go, we really want to be able to hear them and address them. This is a lot of information, but what I wanted to show you here is that we've actually addressed requests from 50 4.2.4 customers in this release. So if you see your name on here, thank you for letting us know what your needs are. As always, as other needs, whether they be bug fixes or enhancement ideas come along, please don't hesitate to contact us through support. We really take your feedback seriously and work very hard to give you what is most meaningful to you. So thank you. All right, so talking a little bit about form and validation updates. First of all, there is a new NEH form. It hasn't actually gone into production at grants.gov yet, but since it's been published and we know that we want to include it, that is going to be provided in Saturday's release. We implemented a class 2 form, which is one of those forms where you actually download a PDF, complete that PDF offline, and then upload that again. So once this does become published at grants.gov and starts to be used in opportunities, it'll be there ready for you. The next form I wanted to talk about briefly is the HRSA NFLP form. For those of you who may have applied to a HRSA opportunity recently that included this form, we all kind of found out together that the PDF form that we typically get from grants.gov was actually missing some of the XML that allows it to work properly. So there's no form version update to this, but we have replaced the form that we would typically use with actually a form version we got from Workspace. So now you can fill out this form just fine. It has everything that it needs in the event that you do have one of these opportunities that include it. I do just want to mention, though, as you can see in 2A here, that it does include kind of an introductory page from Workspace that is just something that we can't strip out, but it doesn't cause any harm. It's something that can be ignored. And certainly if you come across this later and don't remember that we talked about it, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. But I just wanted to let you know that we basically found a way to resolve this issue, so you're not going to have problems in the event that you need to fill out this form going forward. Now, these are changes that are probably going to affect an awful lot of people. NSF is doing their annual updates that go into production on 1/25. And of course, with us doing our release on 1/12, you'll have these changes in place well before NSF starts to use them. You can see here that there's a test opportunity 17-555. So if you do want to do any exploration in your UAT environment, that's a great opportunity to use. So specifically with the NSF cover page, NSF made a couple of changes. The first is that there are 2 new checkboxes in the other information section, one having to do with the funding of an international branch campus and the other having to do with funding of a foreign organization. And we'll be taking a look at this in just a minute, so you can see it right there on the page. I just wanted to add, too, that there's a validation update that goes along with this, that if you happen to check that box for funding of a foreign organization, that you will see a validation down the validation pane prompting you to enter a country name on the other project information form. The other thing is that for type of proposal, there was a type that was center/research infrastructure, and that has now been split into 2 separate types. And the validation for that joint type is the same for the 2 now that they're split, so we've made those validation updates as well. The other NSF form that changed is the Senior Key Person Profile form. As with the cover page, this goes into production at NSF on 1/25. Again, the same test opportunity gives you a chance to take a look at this form. And the change that they've made here is that they are disabling the degree type and degree year fields. They're no longer collecting that information from proposals. Instead, that information is coming from NSF profiles. So this is a good reminder to have your faculty go into their NSF profile and make sure that they have degree type and degree year entered in there. And this is, of course, the case whether you are applying through Cayuse 424 or through one of the NSF portals directly. They're no longer collecting that in the application itself. It's now coming from the profile. So you basically just need to get it right once, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. And then last but not least, NIH has made a couple additional validation updates. The first one having to do with the human subject study record, and then the second and third having to do with the new mechanism. So you'll see more information about this in the release notes, but just wanted to let you know a couple validation updates there as well. Last but not least, a couple of validation changes having to do with subawards. The first one is that we were firing a validation with sort of the wrong timing happening. So sometimes you were seeing on a linked subaward an inaccurate validation message telling you that the key personnel were not included in the prime, but they actually were. That has been resolved. Also, we did sort of some house cleaning about our business rule validations, which are that validations pane down at the bottom, to ensure that subawards that are linked to a prime have the same validation from the validation type as the rest of the prime. We had a little bit of alignment to do in there to make sure that they were happening together. So that work has been done. And then also, because of the change to header 2 and package ID that we did in the last big release, there were some validations being tied to standalone subawards that were firing that really weren't useful. So we've taken those away because, of course, you never actually submit a standalone subaward. A subaward always eventually gets linked to the proposal and submitted that way. So you just won't see those potentially confusing validations any longer. All right, moving off of forms and validations, let's talk for a minute about some more general updates and fixes throughout the application. First, we've gone through and done some work to our fonts and styles to make them more consistent and legible throughout the application. Some people have probably noticed that in that 8.4 release, the last big release that we did, there were actually a few places throughout 4.2.4 where the fonts and styles were being set by your browser default instead of by 4.2.4, which was certainly not something we wanted to have happen. That will no longer happen after Saturday's release. 4.2.4 is now controlling those fonts and styles throughout the application. We also introduced a bug that we definitely needed to get fixed, and that was with the new fringe IDC rate dropdown, where initially when you were creating a proposal, it was defaulting to excluded. It will now default to whatever your selection was, not to excluded regardless. So I apologize for that misstep there. It certainly was something that could be resolved locally, but of course we want the application to do what it's supposed to do immediately. So that has been fixed. The next thing, certainly not something I can demonstrate, so good to talk about for a minute here. Institutions that had single sign-on and the create user function turned on were occasionally having situations where a new user would end up with multiple entries in 4.2.4, and when that happened, that user could not log in without some intervention from Cayuse support. That issue has been resolved. And then the last thing on this page is that on the PHS Fellowship supplemental form, in the field of study section, psychology had been sort of handled incorrectly, so it looked like it was an item for selection as opposed to a section header, and so we've made that change and it is now appropriately a section header. Next, when printing to PDF within Cayuse 4.2.4. First of all, with those style sheets that get printed within 4.2.4, we had some header and footer information that had come from the forms that really didn't need to be in 4.2.4 and could at times cause confusion, including expiration dates. So just please be assured that we have removed the extraneous header and footer information, and you will now be seeing PDFs when you print out of 4.2.4 that don't have information that shouldn't be there. Next, on copied and transformed proposals, we've had an issue that's come up from time to time, in this case with the research training plan, where if you have attachments in sort of the originating proposal and then it becomes copied and transformed into a version that no longer contains those attachments, that those attachments would still show up when you did a print. This was never a problem with submission. Everything on this slide is purely just about printing to PDF. We have resolved that issue, and we've put practices in place when we develop new forms to ensure that this doesn't happen going forward. Again, it was purely a printing issue, didn't cause problems with submissions, but of course we want our printing to perform the way that you expect it to. So it's been changed locally here and as part of our practices going forward. Now to talk specifically about attachments, I want to review this here to make sure we kind of cover all the main points, and then this is most of what we'll be looking at in the live demo. So first of all, draft attachments. For the first time now in Cayuse 4.2.4, you can name draft attachments completely separately from their companion final attachments. This has been implemented, so those draft attachments can be up to 100 characters. You won't actually see the full 100 characters right there in the form, but if you mouse over the file name that we display, which will be a truncated version, you'll be able to see up to 100 characters right there on the page. And again, I'll show you that in just a minute. As part of the change of adding a draft attachment naming, we also have made some alignment improvements where now all the final and draft attachments have column headers, so it's very easy to tell which is which. And of course, they're always in the same position too, with final on the left and draft on the right. And again, some realignment to improve readability. Next, blue, gray, and yes, even purple font colors have been adjusted. I do have to say, not all of the gray is as dark as we intend it to be, but you'll see in the demo that the most important gray areas are still gray, but much darker. We're going to continue to improve on this in the next release. The blue is also much darker. And speaking of purple, now for both final and draft attachments, when they are PDFs, when you click on them to view them, those links will change from blue to purple, as had been the case earlier. But I do have to say as well, it's a much more obvious purple than we used to have in 424. So I think that you'll find that it's much easier to identify that color change to indicate that you've actually viewed that PDF attachment. And again, we'll take a look at this together. And then also on this page, appending attachments. First of all, I want to make sure everybody knows we have not changed the functionality of append. That is still very much provided throughout 424. What we've done is change the way that it appears on the page to both create some more room on the page and to hopefully make it much easier for people to find these things and take advantage of them. So what you'll see now is that instead of having a separate button for append, that we've moved all the append action to the maintain dialog, because when you append, it's really a sort of maintenance. We've added some help text to the page to guide users to use this function. And so now when you manage, you can either append or replace those final attachments. And I think this will make more sense once I show that to you as well. Next, on the supporting document attachments page, now all users can upload all supported document types: Word, Excel, PDF with active fields, basically any attachment that like a super user could put somewhere within Cayuse 424. Now all users can put within the supporting documents page as both a final or a draft attachment. What we've basically done is taken off unnecessary guardrails from this page because the supporting documents page is not ever submitted to a sponsor. It's just used for internal purposes. And so we've heard your requests loud and clear and want to make sure that we're not providing any kind of artificial restrictions there because, again, this is used purely for internal purposes. Next, we have downloaded attachment file names. Now when you actually have uploaded an attachment and then download it, the file name of the download will be the same as what it was when you uploaded it for both finals and drafts. If you've done this before, you may have noticed that in the past or even right now that in some cases those file name attachments upon download were changed, and that's because of how we were treating them in the database. And so if you wanted them to have that same name, you'd have to rename them before you did the upload. That will no longer be the case. And then number 8 on here, the .cayuse files. So those are the files that you create within Cayuse 424, export, and then import again. We were having an issue after the last release where if you had an attachment point that just had a draft attachment without a final in that companion attachment area, that the import was not successful, and that has been fixed. So you can once again basically just not worry about it. You can export and import .cayuse files without concern about draft versus final attachments. And then last but not least, on those attachment points that we call composite or exploitable attachments, they were working just fine before, except that whatever had been exploded onto the page wasn't showing up until you did a refresh of the page. So that's the issue that's been fixed here. Again, the information was populated into the form, it just didn't show. And so that's now been resolved. As soon as you do a composite attachment, it will show up immediately. No refresh needed. And the last item on here is that the attachments form, which is literally just a form that's in some proposals that only exists to have a place to upload lots of attachments. There are 3 different versions of this form, and what we have found is that federal agencies continue to use the first and second version, even though the third one has been out for quite a while. And we needed to make some changes to how our new attachment standards were applied to those 2 earlier versions of that form to make it fully functional. And so that work has been done because based on past experience, we expect some sponsors will continue to use those older versions, and we want to make sure that they are doing for you what they need to do. And then the last thing I want to do before we go into the live demo is just refresh our memories about what attachments had looked like in 424 prior to our last big release. And then this, of course, is what they're looking like right now. And what we're going to do now is actually take a look at what you will be getting this Saturday. All right, so I'm logging in as sort of a typical faculty user who does not have permission to upload anything but PDFs in the final spot, which will be helpful to see as I show you a couple of the changes that we put into place. So let's first take a look at the changes that have happened within NSF. So the first thing we want to look at here is the senior key person page. As I mentioned before, NSF is no longer collecting degree type and degree year from proposals. So this is what you'll be seeing once NSF has published this version of the form, which will be right around the 25th. So we will be delivering this on Saturday, but of course you won't see it until it's actually in a proposal that uses this form version. What you will find when you are working with a standalone subaward is that we are continuing to make sure that everything is possible in a standalone subaward, but as soon as you link one of those subawards to an NSF proposal, that the degree type and degree year will become inactive as far as what goes into the prime. So we're making sure that we continue to manage subaward information on a for NSF proposals versus other proposals, because of course with NSF, we have NSF ID, but no credential, and now the degree type and degree year are no longer being collected. So just wanted to make sure you know that we're continuing to account for those changes. Whereas of course, if you were to link a subaward to another agency, instead of seeing NSF ID, you would see credential, and of course the degree type and degree year would continue to be collected and promoted to the prime proposal. Now let's take a look at the NSF cover page. We have updated this link here for the PAPG. So in the event that you do want to take a look at the 2019 PAPG, that link is in there as you would expect. And then I talked a little bit before about the 2 new options that have been added to other information. First is funding of an international branch campus. Second is funding of a foreign organization. And it's this last one here that you will see. If you select that, you'll get a validation down at the bottom, prompting you to add a country to the other project information form. And then, of course, the other change here, as I had mentioned, is that center and research infrastructure are now 2 separate options. All right, that does it for NSF. I'm going to just move into another proposal while we look at the attachment changes. So I talked a little bit earlier about draft attachments being named separately now. So the research plan page in PHS proposals is a great way to showcase this because there are just simply so many attachments on the page. We can now see that we do have those column headers for final and draft, and you'll see that throughout the application now to really make it very clear which spot is for which. And now if I come in here and add, I'm going to add a final attachment and a corresponding draft. And of course I can rename them on the page as well if I want to. That has not changed. And then I do the upload. And what we can see now on the page that I do indeed have both of my file names showing up for both the final and the draft. The draft attachment is no longer just defaulting to being called draft. And this blue is a much darker blue than we had provided earlier. What I'd like to show you here too is what this looks like if I have a very long file name. So this is a nice long one. I'll upload that into my draft spot. So you can see, as I mentioned before, part of that file name is going to appear, but we're not taking up all the real estate on the page to display everything. But in order to see the whole thing, all you need to do is mouse over it and you can indeed see the entire attachment file name. So let's take a second to see the change from blue to purple. As I mentioned before, this is only available for PDFs, and that's because what detects that change, what we're detecting when we change from blue to purple is that something has actually been viewed within the application as opposed to downloaded. And the only things that you view within your web browser are PDFs. And so you're going to see this behavior for any PDF attachments, whether it's in the final slot or the draft slot. That doesn't matter. It's just that it's a PDF. So when I click on this, you can see in my test, I don't have a whole lot in there, but it's enough for us to see the behavior at work. And because, again, I have viewed that within my browser, it's now changed from blue to purple. All right, let's take a look then at append. So the letters of support give us a nice example of that. So as I mentioned before, we no longer have a separate append button. But what we do have on any of these appendable attachments is that if you mouse over the golden question mark or over this help text down here, you can see confirmation that this is indeed an appendable attachment. And of course, even if you don't mouse over it, you will see the question mark and that support language as well. That will always show up on the page. As I said before, not only were we cleaning up some space on the page, but we also really wanted to make sure that people were much more aware of this append function. What I have found in talking to many of our users is that people who use append really like it, but not everyone's aware that it's there. So this change should make it much easier to tell that it is indeed there and to take advantage of this function. So when you do your initial upload, everything's basically the same, except that you can see here that we've got some grayed out information that just kind of gives you extra indication that there is something to come. And so what I'm going to do here is just upload one letter. And actually, I'll just put in a draft too, just so we have something in that spot. It certainly isn't necessary. So the reason append exists is that there are certain types of documentation. Letters of support is a great example where you're probably going to be collecting lots of documents from lots of different people at different points in time. So you don't have this clean, give me this record, I can upload it into the proposal. So in this case, let's imagine I've gotten my first letter of support and now maybe a week later, another one comes in. So when that's the case, I can click on this manage button and again, go into my final attachment slot. And in this case, I'm going to pick letter number 2. And you'll see here that once I've uploaded that, I now have an option to either replace the current attachment or to keep the current attachment and append an additional file. So if you were to click the replace, it will just replace this attachment the way it would for any other attachment point throughout the application. But if indeed this is just my second letter of reference, then I basically just need to keep making my final PDF bigger as these attachments come in. I'm sorry, as these letters come in, I'm going to select that second one and then click upload. And then of course, if a third one comes in, we would do the same thing. And what I want to point out while I'm doing this one is that these radio buttons are initially empty and the upload button is inactive. And that's because it's really essential that to perform this action, you have to select one or the other. And we don't want people to accidentally do a replace or accidentally append. We want to guide people to make a decision at this point. And so whichever one you pick, you'll note that now you've satisfied the criteria, you've made your selection, and of course you can change your mind and select the other one as much as you want, but ultimately you make your selection. Once you've selected one of those radio buttons, upload is active, and we're in there. So of course, if I now click on my appendable attachment point, you can see that I now have letter 1, letter 2, and letter 3, because Coyote 424 has concatenated all of them for me. So I didn't actually have to stitch together all of those PDFs offline and upload them. So if you've never used Append before, I hope that this is some motivation to take advantage of this feature. It's certainly something that isn't required in 424, but it's there to just take a couple more things out of your life and make your work a little bit easier to do. All right, let's close that. And again, I just want to point out this has, of course, changed from blue to purple because I have viewed it. Okay, let's take a look now at the supporting documents page. And as I mentioned before, now supporting documents, you can basically upload any kind of standard attachment point or a standard file, regardless of what kind of user you are. So what I want to just show you here to give you some confidence in the kind of user I'm using, if I go over here and try to put a non-Word document in a final slot, you'll see here that my user does get that warning telling me that I don't have permission to upload non-PDFs and to ask for help. So now if I go over to supporting documents, we can see that I'm actually able to do that without any issue in that final slot now, or of course as a draft as well. So when I click on add, I'm going to put that same spreadsheet into the final slot. And I guess maybe I'll do a big one over here too. And so we have both of our attachments in, and of course, just like anything else, you can add final or draft together or separately, whatever it is that's useful to you. I do my upload, and we can now see that that has gone in as expected. So now, again, as with everything else throughout the application, drafts have file names. They're truncated on the page, but you can see the whole thing by mousing over. And any user can upload just about any file extension of a document into that final slot. The only reason I say just about any is that if somebody really wanted to push this to the max and upload some very unusual file types, you probably would find something out there that we don't support. But really, any even moderately standard file type is supported here. So your users really should find that they can put in a final or a draft of anything that they would want to onto this page. And I'm just going to do a quick review of my notes, but I believe, yeah, we have taken a look at everything I wanted to make sure we saw today. So at this point, I turn to Carlos to see what needs a little more attention.
Well, we've had 3 questions come in, and I'll now invite any number that wish to join in, but I'll just quickly review a couple that I sent out some answers to, and then answer this last one that came in.
Great.
And one of them, Bess, I wanted to run by you because the question was whether or not there was any change to the degree type and year requirement in NSF biosketches. It's my understanding that there weren't any changes made to the requirements around biosketches, just that particular form.
That's my understanding as well. That wouldn't be a bad question to run by NSF just to be on the safe side, because we do focus so much on the forms themselves as opposed to the content of attachments. But I haven't seen anything that would cause a change to happen there.
Yeah.
But it would be a good question for NSF to be sure.
The PAPG seems to indicate that it's still required, but it could be that there's something else out there more recent. So yeah, good question for NSF.
Yeah.
Another thing that came up was just about restrictions around who can upload what type of attachment. And I just wanted to put out a reminder for everyone, because it is a relatively new addition to 424. There used to be this, ironclad thing where really only a system administrator could upload anything that wasn't a PDF. But there is now a setting in 424's institutional preferences that allows for either pre-award administrators in addition to system administrators, or potentially all users to upload non-PDF files to those final attachment points.
And what I can add to that too is we did a lot of work in our last big release in 8.4 to really systematically improve the validations that you see on a sponsored level, based on these validation types down here. So that way, even if you do give someone, give a certain role the permission to upload non-PDFs, you will still see validations at the time of upload, as well as down in that validation pane down at the bottom, based on sponsor, that give you more information. And there's even a summary of non-PDF attachments that you see when you're doing your submission. So we really wanted to support the ability for you to let people, let more people at your institution upload non-PDFs, while also continuing to give both the uploader and anyone who's reviewing information about the nature of those documents, as well as now showing this metadata on the page, so you can also very quickly review each form page and actually see what that document type is. So I think all of those things really play nicely together to be able to give more people access to uploading non-PDFs. But ultimately that is a change that you make in settings, and it's really up to every individual institution about what works best for you.
That's come a long way. We have a couple other questions here that are actually pretty closely connected that are about drafts.
Okay.
Renita, to answer your question, drafts aren't required.
They're absolutely right. Yeah.
Totally optional. And to me, to answer your question, the benefit of a draft is mostly, and I'm going to definitely add to this, but in my experience, it's mostly when something is in progress. So when there is a particular attachment that isn't yet finalized or complete, but it's maybe being passed around multiple people, it's being edited and changed. And that allows you to have a place where, sort of a common place where people can always download the latest version and then make changes and upload those changes to that draft attachment point. So it's just this ever-evolving document there, but it's not in the final slot where it has that risk of potentially going out before it's completely ready to do so. So it kind of gives you a little workspace or just a spot to centralize an in-progress document until it's ready to really move over to its final form.
Yeah, very well said. Just wanted to reiterate, everything that goes into that final slot, that's your sponsor attachment, and draft is basically, for internal purposes, use that attachment point as it's useful to you without it potentially, accidentally going into that final slot and submitting something you don't intend. So yeah, absolutely.
And I've got one more question here. This is from Jennifer Mills. This one's really more for you, Bess.
Okay.
Will we eventually have the ability to print attachments other than PDF files?
So that's a really good question, and certainly a request that I've heard before. We really run into technical difficulties there, where the printing function really just is pulling together PDFs and creating a master PDF out of that. It's technically very challenging and may not even be possible to take a document that's not a PDF, but it's definitely something that we have in our backlog, because we really understand the utility of it and hope one day that we're able to provide that, but it's not something that we have the ability to do at this time.
All right, and we had one other question from Megan Dietrich about the uploading of non-PDF attachments.
Okay.
So there was an issue at one point with non-PDF still showing warning when a system administrator or somebody else with permission attempted to upload one.
So I believe we resolved that in the 8.4 release. But Megan, if you have seen it, or if anyone has seen that since the 8.4 release, please let us know, because it's my understanding that we did fix that a couple months ago as part of that overhaul of validations. But again, if anyone is still seeing that, we definitely want to know so we can really be sure that it has been fixed the way that we intended.
Yeah. So Megan, if you are still seeing that presently, then just give us a call or just shoot me an email and support, and I'll get that right over to Bess, and I will take it to the engineering team.
Perfect.
And that's all for the current questions.
Okay.
So,
does anyone have anything else? We can certainly end early, but there is time if anything is on your mind.
Looks all clear for the moment.
Okay.
If anything else does come to mind, of course, please contact us at support. You can visit support.cayuse.com or email us at support@cayuse.com. And thanks so much for attending. There will be a recording of this webinar, of course. It will go out with the official release announcement, along with the release notes, which will be hosted on the support site.
Great. Thanks, Carlos. And thanks, everybody, for taking this time to be with us today. And again, as always, if you see anything in this release or have other ideas for fixes or improvements, please don't hesitate to let us know. It's why we're here.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.